The whole Sophie Cunningham move hits completely different because this was never just about bringing a player back. This was about pressure, real pressure, championship now pressure. And if you're not seeing that yet, you're about to. Look, I've been watching how people are reacting to this offseason, and I keep seeing the same surface level takes. Great signing, nice chemistry, fun team. Nah, that's not what this is. Indiana didn't build a fun team. They built a team that is quietly telling the league, we're done waiting. And the scary part, they didn't do it the way everyone else did. While teams were throwing max money at big name, Indiana stayed calm, almost too calm. And that's exactly why people didn't catch what was really happening. Because if you actually slow down and look at the first move they made, it tells you everything. Kelsey Mitchell, 1 year, supermax. Think about that for a second. 1 year, not 3, not 4, 1. That's not just a contract, that's a statement. That's both sides saying, we believe the window is right now, not later. Not, let's see how it goes, right now. And I don't think people are fully respecting what that means. Because, yeah, you can talk about loyalty, and it matters. Mitchell stayed when this team was struggling. She showed up when nobody was watching. That part is real. But this deal, this wasn't a thank you, this was earned. You don't get paid like that in this league just for sticking around. You get paid like that because you produced at an elite level. And she did. Over 20 points a game, elite shooting from 3, one of the top scorers in the league. That's not a role player. That's a problem for defenses every single night. Now here's where it gets interesting. People keep focusing on Caitlin Clark, and yeah, obviously she's the center of everything. But what they're not talking about enough is how dangerous that backcourt actually is when both of them are working together. Because Mitchell doesn't need the ball to impact the game. That's the key. She stretches the floor, she punishes help defense, and the moment you overcommit to Clark, Mitchell makes you pay every time. That's not theory. We've already seen it. So when Indiana locks her in on a 1-year deal, what they're really saying is this: we're not building slowly anymore. We're accelerating. And Mitchell signing that deal, that's her betting on it too. She's not playing it safe. She's saying, I believe this group can win now. And once that piece is set, everything else starts to make sense. Because the next move they made didn't make a lot of noise, but it might end up being one of the smartest, Monique Billings. And if you didn't watch those USA games, you probably missed why this mattered. But if you did, you saw it immediately. The connection with Clark wasn't forced. It wasn't something that needed time. It just worked. And that's rare. You can't always predict chemistry, especially at this level. But with Billings, it was obvious. She understood spacing. She knew where to be. She didn't slow the game down, trying to create something that wasn't there. She just played off what Clark naturally does. And that's exactly what this system needs. Not players who demand touches, but players who make the right play without overthinking it. And this is where I think people are getting it wrong again. They're looking at names instead of fit. Indiana is clearly not doing that. They're building around a style. Fast decisions, smart movements, unselfish play. Billings fits that perfect. She finishes at a high level, she runs the floor, and she doesn't disrupt the flow. That matters way more than people think. Because when you're building a team around a player like Clark, the worst thing you can do is surround her with players who need the game to slow down for them. That kills everything. Indiana avoided that completely. Then you get to Lexie Hull, and this is where the culture part really starts to show. Because this wasn't about ability. Everyone knows she can play. The question was whether she would stay, and she did. Took less money to do it. And I know people throw that phrase around a lot, but think about what it actually means. She had other options, better off, and still chose to come back. You don't do that unless you believe something real is happening. That's not PR. That's not hype. That's a player looking at a situation and saying, this is worth it. And on the court, she brings exactly what this team needs. Defense, toughness, versatility. She's not just filling a role. She's setting a tone. And that toughness isn't just talk. We saw it. Playing through injuries, guarding multiple positions, hitting shots when it matters. That's the kind of player that raises the standard for everyone else. You can't fake that. And when you pair her with the right pieces, it starts to become something bigger than just individual talent. Now here's where everything starts to connect. Because once Mitchell is locked in, once Billings is added, once Hull comes back, the direction is clear. This isn't random. This is intentional. Every move is pointing toward the same goal: speed, spacing, toughness, chemistry, and they didn't overpay to get it. That's the part that really stands out, because while other teams were chasing big name, Indiana was asking a different question. Does this player actually fit what we're trying to do? And if the answer was no, they walked away. That takes discipline, especially in free agency where pressure builds fast, but they stayed patient. And because of that, they kept flexibility. And that's exactly why the Sophie Cunningham move matters so much more than people think. Because by the time they brought her back, the foundation was already built. This wasn't a gamble. This was the final piece of something they had been shaping the entire time. But here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. All of this, it raises the stake a lot. Because when you build a roster like this, when players take less money to be part of it, when your core signs short-term deals because they believe the moment is now, there's no more waiting. There's no more give it time. You're expected to win. And that's the real story, not the signings, not the social media moment, the pressure. Indiana just put real expectations on themselves. And I don't think everyone is ready for what that actually looks like once the season starts. Because now, every game matters differently. Every possession feels heavier. And every decision, from rotations to late game execution, is going to be judged through one lens. Are they ready to win right now? And that's why I keep coming back to this. People are celebrating the move, but they're not talking about the weight that comes with them. This team isn't being built to compete. It's being built to prove something immediately. And this is exactly where Sophie Cunningham changes everything. Not because she's the biggest name, but because of what her return actually represents. People saw the announcement and thought, okay, nice reunion, fun storyline, good vibe. But if you really followed how this played out, it wasn't just a feel-good moment, it was calculated, it was controlled, and honestly, it was a little bit ruthless in the smartest way possible. Because, go back to how it started. It didn't begin with a press release. It didn't begin with a leak. It started quietly, almost like nothing. A simple social media moment. Caitlin Clark tagging Sophie Cunningham. That's it. No explanation, no big statement, just a tag. And if you understand how players communicate during free agency, you know that's never ran. That's not just a joke, that's a signal. And fans picked up on it immediately. You could feel it. The energy shifted. People started connecting dots, watching every post, every comment, every little interaction, and then Sophie starts posting training clips. Hill runs, workouts, locked in energy, not saying anything directly, but showing everything you need to see. That's not accidental timing. That's someone preparing for something they already know is coming. Then comes that one response. No invite is crazy. And right there, the whole thing flipped. Because now it's not speculation anymore. It's confirmation without being official. It's both sides playing along, knowing the deal is basically done. And here's what really stands out to me. Indiana didn't rush to announce. They let it breathe. They let the anticipation build. That tells you something about how confident they were. Teams that aren't sure, teams that are scrambling, they don't play it like that. They lock it in and announce it immediately. Indiana waited. They controlled the moment. And when they finally made it official, the reaction wasn't just excitement, it was validation. Fans felt like they saw it coming, like they were part of it. That matters more than people realize. But again, let's bring this back to basketball, because that's where the real story is. Sophie Cunningham is not here just to be part of a storyline. She fits exactly what this team is building. Tough, physical, plays with edge, and doesn't need to dominate the ball to impact the game. That's a theme with every move Indiana has made. Nobody is coming in to take over. Everyone is coming in to elevate what's already there. And when you put Cunningham next to Lexie Hull, now you're talking about something that goes beyond offense. That defensive pressure, that energy, that willingness to make every possession uncomfortable. That's where games start to shift. It's not always about scoring runs. Sometimes it's about disruption, and those two together create that. More than half of the team steals when they share the floor. That's not a coincidence. That's identity. That's effort meeting system. And once you add that to a backcourt with Clark and Mitchell, now you've got balance. You're not just trying to outscore team. You're forcing forcing mistakes, creating extra possessions, controlling tempo in different ways. And here's what people are still not talking about enough. She took less money to be there. Again, that's another player choosing this situation over a bigger payday somewhere else. That's not normal. You don't see that happen repeatedly unless something real is happening inside that locker room and inside that organization. So now step back and look at it again. Mitchell on a 1-year supermax, betting on now. Hull taking less to stay. Cunningham taking less to return. Billings coming in because she already fits with Clark. This isn't random. This is alignment. An alignment like that doesn't happen by accident. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Indiana didn't just go straight to Cunningham. They looked at other options first. And this is the part that really shows how disciplined they've been through all of this. Because there were bigger names available. Players with size, players with numbers, players that, on paper, look like obvious upgrade. Azura Stevens was right there. Size, shooting, production. You can make a strong argument for that fit. Same with Satu Sabali, another high-level talent that ended up getting a max deal elsewhere. Those are the types of players teams usually chase aggressive. Big names, big impact, big contracts. Indiana didn't do it. They evaluated, they considered, and then they walked away. And I know some fans hear that and think, wait, why wouldn't you go after more talent? But that's exactly the point. They're not just collecting talent, they're building something specific. And if a player doesn't fit that structure, even if they're really good, they're not forcing it. That's hard to do, especially when the rest of the league is moving fast. There's pressure to keep up, to match signing, to win the headline. Indiana ignored all of that. They stayed within their plan. And because of that, they kept their flexibility. That flexibility is what allowed the Cunningham deal to happen the way it did. Team-friendly, controlled, no panic. And now, they still have room to address what's left. That's the part people keep overlooking. This roster isn't even fully finished yet. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Because right now, everyone's focused on the perimeter. Clark, Mitchell, Hull, Cunningham. It's exciting. It's dynamic. It makes sense. But there's still a question sitting there that hasn't been fully answered. The front court depth. Aaliyah Boston is a cornerstone. That's not up for debate. High IQ, strong presence, reliable around the rim. But asking her to handle everything inside every night for a full season, that's where things get risky. We saw moments last season where foul trouble changed everything. The team's balance shifted. The defense softened. The rhythm broke. That's not something you can ignore if you're serious about contending. And the front office knows it. That's why they didn't rush into those max deals earlier. That's why they kept space open. Because the final piece isn't just about adding another name, it's about protecting what they've already built. So now you've got this situation where the core is set, the identity is clear, and one decision is still waiting. And depending on how they handle it, it could be the difference between being really good and actually being ready to win when it matters most. Because everything we've talked about so far, all the chemistry, all the discipline, all the smart signings, it all leads to one reality. This team is not being built for potential anymore. It's being built for result. And once you understand that, the Sophie Cunningham return doesn't feel like a reunion anymore. It feels like a commitment to a specific style, a specific culture, and a very real expectation that this group is going to deliver sooner rather than later. So now the pressure keeps building. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. And the closer they get to finalizing this roster, the more that pressure is going to turn into something you can't ignore. Because at some point, all of this has to translate. And when it does, that's when we find out if Indiana really knew what they were doing this whole time. Or if they just built a team that looks perfect on paper, but still has something missing when the games actually start to matter. And this is the part where everything gets uncomfortable. Because now we have to talk about what Indiana didn't do. Not the highlights, not the feel-good moves, but the decisions they walked away from. That's where you really see how serious they are. Because it's easy to sign players. It's hard to say no to the wrong ones when everyone else is saying yes. Think about it. Azura Stevens was available. A legit stretch big, size you can't teach, someone who can space the floor and still rebound around at a high level. On paper, that checks a lot of boxes for what Indiana needs. Most teams don't hesitate in that situation. They see the numbers, they see the upside, and they throw the money. Indiana didn't. They evaluated her, had the chance, and still stepped back. Same thing with Satou Sabally. That's not a small name. That's a max level player, someone who can impact the game in multiple ways. And again, Indiana had interest. They looked at it, they talked through it, and then they let her go sign that 3-year max deal elsewhere. That's not hesitation. That's intention. Because what they're telling you without saying it is simple. We're not overpaying for talent that doesn't fit exactly what we're building. And I know that sounds basic, but in free agency, it almost never plays out that clean. Teams get caught chasing upgrade. They see a player who looks better individually and convince themselves it'll work. Indiana didn't fall into that trap. And this is where I think a lot of fans are still missing the bigger picture. Fit is not just about position. It's about decision-making speed. It's about understanding spacing. It's about knowing when to move and when to stay out of the way. That matters way more when your entire system is built around a player like Caitlin Clark. Because here's the reality. Clark changes everything. The pace, the reads, the angles, the way defenses react. If you bring in players who can't process the game at that speed, it doesn't matter how talented they are. They slow everything down. And the moment that happens, the advantage disappears. Indiana clearly understands that. That's why every move they've made so far feels connected. Mitchell doesn't need to hold the ball. Billings knows how to move without it. Hall plays within structure but brings intensity. Cunningham adds edge without disrupting flow. Every piece fits the same rhythm. And once you see that, it becomes obvious why they passed on certain players. Now, here's where things start to get even more interesting. Because while everyone is focused on the names that didn't come, the smarter conversation is about what Indiana preserved by not signing them. Cap space, flexibility, option. That's what gives them control right now. They didn't lock themselves into long-term deals that limit what they can do next. They didn't panic and spend everything early. They kept one spot open, and that one spot, it's not just a roster filler. It's the final decision that completes this entire build. And this is where the conversation shifts again, because now it's not about guards or wing. It's about the front court. It's about supporting Aaliyah Boston in a way that actually holds up over a full season. We all saw it last year. When Boston is on the floor and out of foul trouble, everything looks solid. The defense has structure. The offense has balance. But the moment she sits, or the moment she picks up early foul, things start to slip. Not because she's doing anything wrong, but because there wasn't enough behind her to absorb that pressure. And in a league like this, that gets exposed fast. Teams will attack that weakness over and over until you fix it. Indiana knows that. That's why they didn't rush this part. Now you're hearing names like Megan Gustafson come up. And when you actually look at her game, it makes sense. She's efficient around the rim, doesn't need a high volume of touches, and understands how to play within a system. That's the pattern again. Not just talent, but compatibility. Then you've got players like Temi Fagbenle who bring defensive presence and size. That helps take some of the physical load off Boston. Or Brianna Turner, who gives you defense, screens, and doesn't demand offensive touch. Or even Rebecca Allen, who stretches the floor and keeps the paint open. None of these are flashy moves. None of these are going to dominate headlines. But that's not what Indiana is chasing. They're looking for the piece that completes the puzzle, not the piece that steals attention. And this is where the pressure we talked about earlier starts to come back into the conversation. Because once that final spot is filled, there's no more room for excuses. The roster will be what it is. The system will be set. The expectations will be clear. And let's be honest for a second. That expectation is already building. People are starting to talk differently about this team. It's no longer they're improving or they're exciting. Now it's how far can they go? That's a different kind of conversation. That's where things get serious. Because when you're labeled as a contender, everything changes. Teams prepare for you differently. Every mistake gets magnified. Every loss gets questioned. And every weakness gets targeted. That's the reality Indiana is stepping in. And I think that's why the front office has been so careful. They know exactly what's coming. They know once the season starts, none of this buildup matters unless it translates on the court. That's why they've stayed disciplined. discipline. That's why they focused on fit over flash. But here's the part that really makes this interesting. They've also created a situation where the margin for error is small. When players take less money to be part of something, when contracts are short-term, when the messaging is clearly about winning now, you don't get multiple years to figure it out. This isn't a slow rebuild anymore. This is a test, and it's coming fast. So now everything connects. The decisions they made, the players they passed on, the structure of the contract, the final roster spot still open, it's all part of the same plan. A plan that only works if everything clicks at the right time. And that's the risk. Because when you build a team this specifically, when you rely this heavily on chemistry and fit, it has to come together quickly. There's no fallback plan where you just rely on raw talent to carry you through. So as much as people are celebrating the moves, there's another side to it that isn't being talked about enough. This team has to be right, not just good. Right. The rotations, the spacing, the decision making, the balance between offense and defense, all of it has to align. And if it does, then yeah, this looks like one of the smartest off seasons in the league. But if it doesn't, if even one key piece doesn't fit the way they expect, then all that discipline, all those decisions to pass on bigger names start to get questioned. That's the reality Indiana has chosen. And honestly, it's a bold one, because now we're not just watching a team improve. We're watching a team that made very specific bets on itself.